A lycanthrope, or most commonly known as a werewolf, is an individual who can shapeshift into a wolf, either on their own or after being placed under an affliction or curse. This transformation mainly occurs during the night, more specifically during the night of the full moon. In Indian folklore, a yapam is the same as a werewolf. He or she wants to protect the jungle even if it has to kill somebody. The yapam acts as a virus and can infect anyone with a bite. If a person is bit, that person becomes a yapam and has to protect the forest for the rest of his life. The concept of werewolf has been circulated for centuries, originating first in the European countries. With colonialism, this concept or idea spread across the world. Belief in werewolf developed in parallel to the belief in witches in the late Middle Ages and early modern period. Like the witchcraft trials as a whole, the trial of supposed werewolves emerged in what is now Switzerland in the early 15th century and spread throughout Europe in the 16th, peaking in the 17th and subsiding by the 18th century. Hit the subscribe button as it helps out a lot. We are very close to 500 subs and that would be a big milestone for this channel. The persecution of werewolves and the associated folklore is an integral part of the witch hunt phenomena, albeit a marginal one. Accusations of lycanthropy being involved in only a small fraction of witchcraft trials. During the early period, accusations of lycanthropy were mixed with the accusation of wolf riding or wolf charming. The case of Peter Stump in 1589 led to a significant peak in both interest in and persecution of supposed werewolves, primarily in French-speaking and German-speaking Europe. The phenomena persisted longest in Bavaria and Austria, with persecution of wolf charmers recorded until well after 1650. The final cases taking place in the early 18th century in Carinthia and Styria. After the end of the witch trials, the werewolf became of interest in folklore studies and in the emerging Gothic horror genre. The history of the werewolf, flesh-hungry monsters who turn during the night hunting for food, originated during the Middle Ages in the context of Christianity. But stories of humans turning to wolves or shapeshifting to wolves have been around way before Christianity era. A few references to man changing into wolf were found in ancient Greek literature and folklore. Herodotus, in the histories, wrote the Neori, a tribe he places to the northeast of Scythia, were all transformed into wolves once every year for several days, and then changed back to their human shape. This tale was also mentioned by Pomponius Mela. In other accounts, people relate werewolves or lycanthrope to the story of King Lycaon of Arcadia. In this story, Zeus, the king of the gods in Greek mythology, came to visit Lycaon in the form of a common man. To test if Zeus was actually a god, Lycaon served the entrails of a hostage. Disgusted by his hospitality, Zeus transformed King Lycaon to a wolf, thus giving rise to one of the first records of a werewolf. Some other records, however, say that Zeus did not turn Lycaon to wolf. Instead, he struck Lycaon and his son with a lightning bolt, obliterating both of them for their disrespectful behavior. Another text also relates the origin of werewolf to Arcadia, to a man named Damarcus. He turned into a wolf after tasting the entrails of a human child that was sacrificed at the altar of Zeus. He regained his original form again after 10 years. He later went on to become an Olympic champion. There is also another tale of lycanthropy. In Arcadia, once a year, a man was chosen by lot from Antis clan. The chosen man was escorted to a marsh in the area, where he hung his clothes into an oak tree, swam across the marsh and transformed into a wolf, joining a pack for 9 years. If during this 9 years he refrained from tasting human flesh, he returned to the same marsh, swam back and recovered his previous human form, with 9 years added to his appearance. Early Christian authors also mentioned werewolves. In the City of God, Augustine of Hippo explains that it is very generally believed that by certain witches' spell, men may turn into wolves. There is evidence of widespread belief in werewolves in medieval Europe. This evidence spanned much of the continent as well as the British Isles. Werewolves were mentioned in medieval law codes, such as that of King Nut, who informed us that the codes aim to ensure that the madly audacious werewolves do not too widely devastate nor bite too many of the spiritual folk. Germanic pagan traditions associated with wolfmen persisted longest in the Scandinavian Viking Age. Harald I of Norway is known to have a body of Ulf Hednar, meaning wolf-coated men, and resemble some werewolf legends. The Ulfhednar were fighters similar to berserkers, though they dressed in wolf hides rather than those of bears and were reputed to channel the spirits of these animals to enhance effectiveness in battle. These warriors were resistant to pain and killed viciously in battle, much like wild animals. Ulfhednar and berserkers are closely associated with the Norse god Odin. The situation as described during the medieval period gives rise to the dual form of werewolf folklore in early modern Europe. On one hand, the Germanic werewolf, which becomes associated with the witchcraft panic, and on the other hand, the Slavic werewolf, which becomes associated with the concept of revenant or vampire. The Eastern werewolf vampire is found in the folklore of Central and Eastern Europe, including Hungary, Romania, and the Balkans, while the Western werewolf sorcerer is found in French, German-speaking Europe, and in the Baltic. Being a werewolf was a common accusation in witch trials throughout their history, and it featured even in the Velasquez witch trials, one of the earliest such trials altogether, in the first half of the 15th century. Likewise, in the Vaud, Switzerland, child-eating werewolves were reported as early as 1448. A peak of attention to lycanthropy came in the late 16th to early 17th century as part of the European witch hunts. A number of treatises on werewolves were written in France during 1595 and 1615. Werewolves were cited in 1598 in Anjou, and a teenage werewolf was sentenced to life imprisonment in Bordeaux in 1603. Until the 20th century, wolf attacks on humans were an occasional but still widespread feature of life in Europe. Some scholars have suggested that it was inevitable that wolves, being the most feared predators in Europe, were projected into the folklore of evil shapeshifters. This is said to be corroborated by the fact that areas devoid of wolves typically use different kinds of predator to fill the niche. Were hyenas in Africa, were tigers in India, as well as were pumas and were jaguars in South America. Some modern researchers have tried to explain the reports of werewolf behavior with recognized medical conditions. Dr. Lee of Guy's Hospital in London wrote a paper in 1963 entitled On Porphyria and the Etiology of Werewolves, in which he argues that historical accounts on werewolves could have in fact been referring to victims of congenital porphyria, stating how the symptoms of photosensitivity, reddish teeth, and psychosis could have been grounds of accusing a person of being a werewolf. So this was the story of werewolves and how many different cultures have their own origin story for such a creature. That's it for today's video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please hit the subscribe button and the like button. It helps out a lot. We are very close to 500 subs. If you want, you could watch other videos as well.